the last session and the best session of today. We are going to talk about focus on content authors with content as a service. I'll start with a small introduction. My name is Adrian. I'm the CEO of Softesco, Drupal agency with offices both in the US and Romania. I'm also founder of OpenStory, and I'm a Drupal developer since 2007. I'm an avid supporter of Drupal and Drupal community, and probably I've met some of you around the Drupal camps and Drupal cons across the globe. For today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the history of content editing interfaces. I will talk about content editors versus content marketers, as well as content as a service. And at the end, if we have time, I'll take some questions. I also have a little friend that will help me along the presentation with some ideas and inputs to complement the content that I've prepared. So for the part of history of content editing interfaces, so we'll start from mainframes, what I think are one of the earliest forms of managing and editing content, to some of today's latest innovation, and this is actually not a picture of Neuralink that Elon Musk there surrounds. However, I prefer to have some input from my friend Little Prince, who says that all grown-ups were once children, but only a few of them remember. Very wise. Okay, so let's see. We'll not actually start from the mainframe system, but I'll start with the client-server interfaces in the 90s. And I don't know how many of you are maybe too old or too young to remember, but this is actually what was back then. Atlassian when Atlassian was not around, Mail when Gmail was not around, or Zendesk when Zendesk was not around. And this is one of the let's say the winner of that era for the client server system, and it's no other than the Lotus Notes. They had actually two misfortunes on their journeys. So one of them happened when they were bought by IBM, and the second misfortune that happened to Lotus Notes is that with the 2000 years, we went into the web-based CMSs. And some of the winners of the 2000 era with the web-based CMSs are, of course, Drupal, WordPress, and one CMS that maybe not all of us will remember. It was called Day Software, that in 2010 was bought by Adobe, and then later on rebranded as Adobe Experience Manager. And actually, the acquisition cost for that tool was close to $240 million. So that was quite a paycheck for those guys in Switzerland. Following up with the late 2010. We go to what I call the broadening appealing of CMSs to a wider market, and these are the tools that are kind of nowadays known drag and drop CMSs, and two of the, let's say, the most well-known tools that are part of that era are Wix and Squarespace. And both of them boast millions of users as a use base, and they kind of look like this. They have a nice interface where content authors or content marketers can have the ability to change and move elements around. And I think, if I remember some of the discussion that I had a couple of years ago, us in the Drupal community were a bit worried on how this will affect our market. But I think if it's to look at what happened after Wix and Squarespace appeared, I think they went more for the WordPress market than the Drupal, the typical site that a Drupal developer does. And then reaching back to the later years, and I would say like the nowadays systems, we have the cloud-based content management systems, and we have probably brands that you know, it's like Contentful and Ghost. And of course, IBM came back also into this era, and they have also a system that it's a cloud-based CMS tool, and it's called Watson Content Hub. If we look over a bit on the trends side of all these CMSs, we see Drupal interest over time kind of peaking out. We had a peak in 2012, and in the recent years we settled up around the same level that we were like about 2 years ago, and this data is from Google Trends. If we look at WordPress, we kind of have the same curve. But if we look to the other type of CMS that I've talked briefly about, Wix and Contentful, we see that the interest on them is on the rise. I have also to say that if we put all of these charts on the same scale, they'll be totally different. So I think what is matter is not let's say the size, but it's what I want to highlight here is the trend. So it's not important the numbers, and because if we'll put the numbers, probably Drupal and WordPress will be way above these little guys in terms of Google searches and interest. And nowadays, I think, as far as I've counted last time, there are about 50 cloud-based CMSs, and you can find some of them on headlesscms.org, and I think there is like one cloud CMS appearing every month. We'll see how many of these cloud-based CMSs is going to survive over the next years, but it's definitely, I see a trend in the market and a lot of interest in moving the CMS, that type of approach, to a cloud-based solution. Okay, Little Prince wants to add something to the subject. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched; they are felt with the heart. Indeed, so this is what I think is actually happening with the cloud CMS. And for me, cloud means not that we are not being able to interact with it, but us as the developers, we don't have access to the backend system anymore. Of course, all these cloud CMSs are being powered by what I call a JavaScript renaissance. So all these new JavaScript-based frameworks, such as React or Angular or Vue.js, they power a new type of application where a cloud CMS or a cloud-based system that manages your content and your content architecture can be decoupled from the front end, and we've probably seen several talks around this event on the decoupled approach for application. So what we can conclude so far, if we look for the past 15-20 years, is that content is now moving to the cloud. But also we can acknowledge that the content is delivered the content is delivered to sites, but as well as to apps, display ads, wearables, and voice interfaces. So the same content that a couple of years ago was only delivered to your website via classical CMS in what we can understand in traditional sense, the content is nowadays, the same kind of content may be nowadays sent across different digital channels. No one is ever satisfied where they are. Indeed, Little Prince, you have a bit of wisdom here. So nowadays, content is everywhere, and what I think it's important to notice is what I call two eras in terms of content approach. We have one era where we have one single silo, and the content is in a classical CMS, be it Drupal, Adobe Experience Manager, or maybe a private or a custom application. And we have the new era where your content can reside on multiple systems. So you have your content in a CMS, in a cloud CMS, or maybe in a proprietary solution application that is done with Angular, Java, or some other system. So I think in terms of content location, we can now let's say discern between the two approaches: a single silo or multiple silos for the content. Little Prince wants to add something to the discussion. People where you live, the Little Prince said, grow 5,000 roses in one garden, yet they don't find what they're looking for, and yet what they're looking for could be found in a single rose. So what I wanted to add to this is like what in the past was to be a single location, as you know, having your content in a Drupal installation or in a WordPress site. Nowadays, as a content authors, you might have to manage or find your content across multiple systems. So you as a content author or the content editor, how you are going to manage the content if you have to deal within your organization with several silos or several locations where the content is. However, before I answer this question, I want little to discuss on what is the role of content editor. And if we look at the history of content editing, I think as a content editor, you are responsible for creating the content, but also creating the experience around building that content. And you, as a content editor, you have to manage the content experience, but also to manage the content itself. You know, updating it, making it relevant to the user, keeping it with facts and factual to what you want to the message that you want to communicate. However, if it's to split these two apart, if we put creating the content and managing the content as one role, and we put creating the experience and the managing the content experience as a different role, I think what we can all agree is that maybe in fact what are we talking about? There are two different roles that even in the Drupal community we try to put them all together. So instead of having one single, let's say, user role that manages the content, but also how that content is displayed to the end users, maybe we have to focus on having or building tools that are specifically created for content authors and tools that are for marketers. And when I'm talking about marketers, I'm talking about those kind of tools that allow people who are on the marketing side to choose if they want a hero image with a label and some description text, or if they want to have a piece of text with displayed on two columns and maybe an image on one of those columns. So if we look at what tools we build as developers for marketers, we have enabled for marketers the ability to do A/B testing on content and then on the content experience. We allow marketers to manage personalization and how the content is targeted for specific roles, and also try to enable them with a degree of success to manage the content through a drag and drop interfaces. And probably some of the best examples are I've seen in the market nowadays are those drag and drop interfaces developed with Angular or React application. However, if we look at on the tool stack for content editors, we enable their content experience or content managing experience by enable translation with translation services. We allow content editors to evaluate how successful is their content by providing different type of analytics, either if those analytics are coming from external systems like Google Analytics, or maybe how that content is performing on social media. But also, of course, work and enable them to manage the content through the interfaces of the systems we are building on. However, if it's to look a bit on the future side of the things, between these two roles, the content editors and content marketers, my personal belief is that on the content marketing side, we can see some bit of automation. And there will be probably in the future system that will automatically target and manage how the content experience is delivered to the end users. However, for content editors, there will always be a need for people to write and create factual information based on relevant information that's out there. So on the automation side, I think marketers are more at risk for automation than content editors. So how do we manage the content across all these systems as a content author? I think we as developers, we have to create an optimal experience for the content author to be able to manage the content in the new era. And I talk about the new era when your content might be on different applications or on different systems, not in one single silo. So the point I want to make so far is that content is nowadays across multiple digital assets and is delivered to multiple channels, be it those like wearable interfaces, digital ads, display ads, or maybe on systems that are let's say managed by different CMSs or different systems. We have to differentiate the role of content authors and content marketers. And also we have to improve the tools for content authors to enable them to manage content better in the new era of decoupled application, decoupled systems. So that brings us to the focus of this talk, and that will be how do we define content as a service? My personal belief is that we need to create an interface or tool that will allow you as a content editor to manage the content on any platform. So you as a content editor, if you are part of a medium or large organization and your organization has multiple systems that deal with content and that's delivered across different digital channels, as a content editor, you don't care if your system is being developed as Contentful or Drupal or WordPress or maybe a custom application. And actually what you need is more like a content management experience that will allow you to do your job no matter what the end system is behind those interfaces. So instead of content as a service, maybe we have to talk about content management as a service. Little Prince has something to add to the discussion. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. So let's see how we can tame the content in the new era. One approach that I started working on 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, is to create a tool that I've called it OpenStory, which is an open source system or open source interface that aims to improve the editorial experience for content authors. With OpenStory, we've created an interface so that content editors, currently for Drupal, but in the future for any other kind of CMSs that's out there, be decoupled, like those cloud-based systems or WordPress or Adobe, they have a dashboard that allows them to manage content in a user-friendly way. And when I mean content, I mean all forms of digital content on their site or sites. We do this with a decoupled application. So that means in the traditional sense of a decoupled application, we have a backend, a middleware, and a JavaScript frontend. In our case, we have a backend that can be a Drupal website, can be a Contentful website, or any other kind of website. And then we have a middleware, which is in fact a Node.js application that talks with the OpenStory UI. The OpenStory middleware or the Node.js application, it handles the communication between cloud CMSs like Contentful, Superdesk, or any other cloud CMSs out there, and traditional open source CMSs like Drupal or WordPress. They all can interact with the Node.js application, and the Node.js application acts like an interface for all these CMSs and allows new functionalities to be enabled for content editors, and those functionalities are collaboration on content creation. So that means having a kind of Google Docs experience for managing and creating content. It can allow content syndication, so that means you can have one piece of content written for one CMS and publish that across different other CMSs or different kind of other application. And also allows you to enable cognitive services for content. That means maybe some kind of image recognition, on sentiment analysis, on comments, or on the content that you write. And also integration with media management tools and some other kind of analytics systems such as Google Analytics and systems that manage the statistics part of your content. In terms of features, what we've designed is a dashboard with widgets that are specifically designed for content editors, and it allows you to manage the content, including content translation, managing the comments, the users, and manage the media that is accessible for your website, as well as perform some operation that sometimes are needed when you edit and manage content, and that is clear cache and run cron. We've also enabled one functionality that I found that is particularly interesting for content authors, to the ability to have information from Google Analytics right in the interface they are using to manage the content. These are some of the screenshots that we have in OpenStory. This is how the content management part looks like, and it's powered by an Angular framework, by the Angular framework. This is how the dashboard looks like, which allows you to customize your dashboard with different widgets as a content author, and some of the content experience that we have there for writing and updating your content part. In terms of dashboard for content authors, we've created a library of about 32 widgets for content authors. Some of the widgets are still in development, but you have already available widgets that connects your content authoring experience with Google Analytics, or it provides different stats for your for the content that you have. In terms of security, currently Drupal talks with JSON to the Node.js, the middleware system, and the middleware system talks with the OpenStory UI, all over, of course, over HTTPS. In terms of current availability for implementing OpenStory with Drupal, you have an OpenStory module on Drupal.org that exposes some JSON APIs to manage the content from your Drupal side. It has a Node.js application that's open source, and the code is available on GitHub that you can download and personalize or extend. There is an open source Angular UI, the OpenStory UI, that is also available for download on GitHub. And in terms of implementing, it's just drag on, or let's say download and install kind of approach for module. There is no separate authentication layer necessary for the content editors. They can use the same username and the permissions that are available for their Drupal site. We've also tested it, and it works with Umami, one of the latest addition for the Drupal part. On the Drupal side. The current release allows content management for all core Drupal core fields, including paragraphs, and it has a dashboard with widgets. It allows content management, users, comments, and media management, as well as the ability to run cron and clear cache. We are working on a new version of the OpenStory that will allow content collaboration and content scheduling, so the ability to write a piece of content and schedule it to have it published at a certain day and time in future. We want to enable Elasticsearch, and we want to provide some kind of cognitive services for the content part. That means image recognition, or maybe some kind of sentiment analysis on the comment side. There is a demo available on the OpenStory UI, and all the code and the source code is available to download for free and extend on GitHub. We also have a New York meetup scheduled for next week on 23rd of July inside our office in New York. And you can also use Zoom to join the meetup, and that meetup will be specifically related to OpenStory, where we'll be able to demo and present some functionality behind the OpenStory. In terms of alternatives, based on the research that I've done, I came across similar approaches on the internet. One approach that has been significantly developed for content authors is gather content, and it focuses more on the tools, let's say on enabled or on offering tools that will enable content authors or authors to manage content in a collaborative way. However, on the gather content side of the features, they don't allow pushback or integration with the backend systems such as Drupal, WordPress, or some other applications. Initially, I wanted to showcase also Acquia Content Hub. Unfortunately, currently the tool or the initiative from Acquia that is kind of similar with OpenStory is available only on private beta, and probably in the future that will be more open, and we can do, or I will be able to do more. Let's say more comparative approach between Content Hub or some other systems and OpenStory. Last and but not the least, Little Prince will want to add something to the discussion. And now here's my secret, a very simple secret. It's only with the heart that one can see rightly, and what is essentially is invisible to the eye. Thank you very much. I think we still have like 1 or 2 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah.
So I learned at the conference today that for supplying content to lots of different types of devices, well, maybe you don't want to store that content as HTML. Does OpenStory kind of do anything in that regard to facilitate storing content, or I guess authoring content in a way where it can be stored in Drupal or another CMS for display on non-HTML devices?
So the question was if OpenStory offers any possibility for the content to be stored not as HTML, so that it can be available for different type of other devices. To answer to your question, so on the OpenStory, the approach that we took so far is that we manage structured content. So that means the content type that is available on the Drupal side or any other platform with the fields and the fields definition that you have are exposed automatically on the OpenStory interface. So if that field is HTML field, you can write HTML entities inside that field. But if your field is a title or image or a date picker, that's how it's going to be exposed on the OpenStory interface.
How do you handle the differences between the various CMS functionalities if you have like a centralized kind of experience on top of it? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, for example, there's things that many things Drupal can do that WordPress cannot. Like, how do you kind of?
Yeah.
Or is that something you just bake in with each kind of plugin on the back end?
So the question was how we baked in different differences that are found across various platforms, Drupal, WordPress, and how they handle this. They might have their own implementation or their own solution. To answer this, this is a work in progress project, so that's why we have all this meetup, and it's open source, so we are looking for input and collaboration. In terms of handling the differences, the Node.js application is going actually to provide different type of compatibility between the systems, and the middleware actually is going to allow some functionalities to happen across systems, all systems like WordPress, Adobe, or Drupal. So far, we found that the workflow part of managing the content is the most different one. So WordPress currently has a very simple workflow system. Drupal has one of the most advanced one in terms of open source solution out there. Contentful had their own implementation for the workflow. So in terms of differences, I think the most challenging part will be the workflow, and for that, currently we've decided to support publish and unpublish of a piece of content, and we want to enable, let's say, a custom workflow implementation within the OpenStory application. That will be one of the differences that we found, and to be most seamless one between the systems. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.